Hey everybody, how you doing? Tekking and Barry here, back again, alongside special guest star Jinbe, the helmsman of the Straw Hat Pirates. Unfortunately, they do not make Funko Pop figurines of Jinbe yet. I'm assuming those are going to happen at some point, but until then we have this really awesome figurine, so I guess it all works out. This will be chapter 1018, titled Jinbe versus Who? Who's Who? That's who. Yeah, okay, the joke is starting to wear on even me right now. Like, I was waiting for that chapter title at some point, you know, eventually it was going to be Jinbe versus Who's Who, and I'm like, oh, I can, you know, make a joke about that, you know, the Who's Who joke, but at this point, it's just starting to, you know, get tiring. Okay, so, the cover page is actually kind of adorable. It's, Ulti and page 1, and it's page 1, like, sitting down reading a book about dinosaurs, dinosaurs, and then Ulti is kind of trying to get page 1 to, like, play with her, like, come on, Pei, let's go play tag or something, right? And they are in a room surrounded with dinosaur plushies, but they are dinosaur plushies of each of the ancient zones that we've seen so far in the story of One Piece, okay? So they're not even all dinosaurs. There's a plushie mammoth, there's a plushie Rosa Magalia Gravagelli, which was Black Maria's ancient zone. There's a plushie dragon, so Kaido. There's a plushie brachiosaur, a saber-toothed cat, a pteranodon, an allosaurus, yeah, a triceratops because of Sasaki, and it's just kind of like an adorable little scene. It was even actually, I think the original request was that for Oda to draw Ulti in page 1 when they were kids, so maybe that makes more sense with like that was like their playroom or something growing up, but no, Oda decided to draw them as adults, which I imagine like, you know, let's say Ulti and page 1 were like, you know, running their own pirate crew, like they were both captains or something before they joined Kaido's crew. This is how I imagine that their daily antics would go, you know, like page 1 is like, man, I want to read about dinosaurs today, and then Ulti barges in, he's like, let's go play, and just like, ugh, you know, like that's basically how it would be anyway. So that's the cover page. So we pick up right actually where we left off with Tama controlling the gifters. Okay, so they are rampaging through the entirety of Onigashima, and we got some numbers here. We have 300 total headliners, all with gifter powers, because I think aside from Hawkins, and I don't know, was Apu a headliner? I feel like he was. Aside from like the members of the Worst Generation that teamed up with Kaido's crew, all the other headliners have gifter powers, okay? That's kind of like the whole point, right? There are regular gifters that are not headliners, but like every headliner is a gifter except for Hawkins and like Apu, right? Because they have their own individual devil fruit powers, okay? So we see Hamlet, we see another member of the gifters that has like a bison for like a lower half, like picture Speed, except, you know, his lower half is like of a bison and it's like actual head of the bison, so he's like, you know, running through the battlefield, like, you know, like knocking people down and everything. So it's just absolute chaos here, and there is a report over the intercom system, and I don't know who's actually relaying this information. I don't know if this is Bao Huang or if this is Queen, because Bao Huang was knocked out and Queen is dealing with Sanji right now, but somebody is on the intercom system through Onigashima relaying the information that like, yeah, so everybody's probably wondering what the hell is going on right now, you know, where like the gifters and headliners are just wrecking our own crew. So there was like this little kid that announced that like everybody should just work on the side of the rebellion, and the gifters are all listening to her, so probably target her. She's probably using some sort of magic, yeah. So the remaining members of the Beast Pirates hear this announcement and they just assume like, oh, that's that brat, you know, she must have some kind of magic power. It's weird that they say magic power or some kind of weird ability, because these are members of Kaido's crew. These are not like samurai from Wano. These are like, you know, pleasures and waiters of the Beast Pirates. They should know what devil fruit powers are. But then again, keep in mind, you know, remember Miss Golden Week? She had like her colors trap ability that had nothing to do with devil fruit abilities, and she was able to hypnotize people with that power. So I guess it's not completely insane to think that it's not a devil fruit. But at the end of the day, they know that Otama was the one that caused all the gifters to fight on the side of the rebellion. So they just assume, oh, if we could just kill her, then the power might end, and then, you know, the gifters come back to their senses. Okay, so yeah, we assume this, like everybody's gonna be targeting Otama now, right? And so we cut back over to Usopp and Nami. Speed arrived there, and so Otama and Nami get on the back of Speed and they run away. Usopp's kind of like chasing them like, hey, let me on too, come on, this is ridiculous. So Usopp like jumps on the back of Speed and they're riding through the battlefield. Gazelle Man is there as well. You know, he's the gazelle, so he can run really fast, but he also gets winded really fast as well, because I don't think gazelles can run really really fast in the wild, but I don't think they're designed to, like, run super fast for long periods of time, okay? So that's, like, kind of gets Gazelle Man really winded. So he's running, and he's like, hey, I saw Komachiyo over there, and he was injured, so don't worry, Otama, don't worry, we're gonna take care of him. So anybody that was worried about Komachiyo, the Koma Inu, there you go. We got some, you know, exposition on him. He's gonna be okay, right? And so Nami is just like, wow, this ability is awesome, right? Literally, and Usopp's like, yeah, I know, right? Just making friends on the battlefield of your worst enemies. Man, I wish that would have worked on, like, page 1 or the zones. We could have just popped a freaking Dango in Kaido's mouth and called it a day. So it's like, well, what are you going to do about that? But still, this is very, very helpful here. So then while this is going on, Zeus pops out of the Climattact in his cloud form. I guess we'll probably get some of him, like, appearing on the Climattact itself, like the eyes appearing and, like, talking to Nami through the Climattact, because remember, Nami did say, like, I don't want a weapon that talks to me, right? So maybe, like, the preferred method of communication will be for Zeus to leave the Climattact in his cloud form to actually have a conversation with Nami, rather than, like, his face appearing on the Climattact itself, although that is pretty funny still. So Zeus comes out and just says, hey, Nami, so can I be your servant again, you know? And so Nami's like, what are you talking about? Of course not. And Zeus is like, no! He's like, we can be partners instead, or, you know, you could be my sidekick instead. And so Zeus is like, oh, yay, awesome! Out of my way, I'm Nami's partner! And so he just, like, charges ahead and just electrocutes all of the Beast Pirates on the path as they're running down the hallway on the back of Speed. It's just like, I am Zeus! I have been reborn! I am the partner of Nami! You know, and so launching all these attacks. And so everything seems to be going good for that side of things, right? The gifters are all helping them out. They got Zeus back. So that's all working. Now we cut over to the CP0. I was waiting for their response. It's not as hilarious as I thought it was going to be. I thought they were just going to, like, flip the Go board over. But no, I mean, hey, when you're a member of CP Aegis 0, I guess one of the things that you're taught is to be cool and collected no matter what crazy stuff. Like, this is literally an ocean where there are magic fruits that give you superpowers, okay? You might encounter some weird shit out there in the Grand Line, especially the New World. So if you're a member of CP0, you can't really freak out over these things. You kind of have to just take it as it comes and just be like, all right, so it seems that a little girl has used her devil fruit power to sway a bunch of the strongest fighters of the Beast Pirates onto the side of the rebellion. Okie dokie, I guess we're just rearranging. How many people have died from this? About 1,000. All right, so they took out about 1,000, and that's 300 working on their side. So the current situation is, on the Go board, we have 16 pieces representing the Beast Pirates, so about 16,000, and we have 9 pieces representing the Rebellion, 9,000. Okay, so just to keep this in mind, I've said this before, but this is kind of really important to keep track of the numbers here. This war started with 30,000 people on Kaido's side, and about 5,000 on the samurai side. It was 5,400 to be exact, okay? So where we are right now in this battle during the Fire Festival is the Beast Pirates are almost down by half of their full fighting force. And that was the fighting force combining Orochi's group with Kaido's group. So Kaido alone had 20,000, Orochi had 10. So that was literally the full fighting force of the Mimawari Gumi, the Oniwabanshu, and all of the Beast Pirates, waiters, pleasures, gifters, headliners, Tobiropo, All-Stars, everything together. 30,000. It is now at 16,000, almost half, and the Rebellion has effectively 4,000 more people fighting for them than they did at the start of the battle. So the CP0, they're like, you know, they're a little worried, but they're not freaking out over it or anything, so they're like, yes, it would seem the Rebellion is, kind of getting the upper hand here. Like, they have they have almost double what they had when they started. So, and we're down by half, so that's not good. Now, this is something else where the CP0, a big question, I even made a video about this a couple weeks ago, is, what is their objective here? Like, what are they even trying to do? Like, they're still here in the middle of this war. Are they just trying to absorb observe the battle. I assume that they would not get involved until one side won. You know, whether it be Kaido and Big Mom wins, they would do something, or if the rebellion wins, then they would make their presence known, or they would just leave. They would be there, because this is like the turning point of the entire world. Like, really, the whole world does kind of hang in the balance here. That is not an exaggeration, because if Kaido were to win, Kaido and Big Mom team up and form an alliance, they could threaten the world government and the Marines, right? So the CP0 is probably just there to make sure, like, who wins and then report back to, like, what they're going to have to do, like, what their next step's going to be. If Kaido and Big Mom win this battle, they're going to have to make some arrangements, right? So one of the things, though, they do mention specifically is, like, well, whoever wins this war is really no consequence to us. However, we must confirm the death of at least that one person, him. We have to confirm the death of him. Now, they're talking about Huzu. They don't mention him by name. Of course, Huzu is probably not his real name. Now, it's a card name. It's like a code name, right? So I'm assuming Huzu was not his real name when he was a member of CP9 12 years ago. So maybe his real name is significant, and that's just the reason they're not mentioning it right now. So they're like, okay, we have to make sure Huzu is dead by the end of this night. Okay, and so another member of CP is like, well, you know, do we really need to worry about it that much? Like, even if that person, like, it seems like they got intel that a former member of CP9, Huzu, is working for Kaido. Okay, so he changed his name, he wears the mask, so they weren't really sure, but now they got some solid intel that he might be there. So they're like, okay, even if that intel was true, and he is here right now fighting on the Beast Pirates side, the intel that he would have, you know, from when he was a member of CP9, that has to be so dated, you know, because he got thrown in prison 12 years ago, and he broke out. We don't know when Huzu broke out, but he's like, any information, any top secret information he would have about the government would be so outdated at this point, it wouldn't harm us, right? But another member of the CP9, not the CP9, the CP0, there's 3 of them there in the room, they bring up that's like, well, yeah, he might not have information that's dangerous to us, but it sets a bad precedence, okay? We cannot have, you know, like, the idea is when CP0 captures you, or when CP0 has its sights on you, you're done. You have no hope, okay? You're going to be detained, or you're going to be killed. The idea that somebody could, you know, shame the government as much as Huzu did and then just get away, you know, that doesn't set a good precedence. He has to die here tonight, okay? But also keep in mind that other CP0 member mentioned, like, oh, whoever wins or loses this battle is no consequence to us. We just have to make sure he's dead. That seems to imply, like, the whole reason they're there before they double check on, like, Kaido and Big Mom or the Rebellion or Luffy or anything is to make sure who dies. That's, like, the main reason they're there. Why they're still in the middle of this hell of a battlefield right now in their indestructible waiting room of reception. You know, like, yeah, I don't know. Like, there's a lot to unpack there, okay? But one of the members of CP also says, hey, look, he is fighting Jinbei after all. Like, Jinbei, former warlord of the sea, he's wicked strong, so he's probably gonna die anyway. That's, like, the idea that they're saying. So there's other reasons they're there, certainly. Like, the whole reason CP went there to begin with was to broker a deal with Orochi, and Orochi shot one of them in the head. It's like, we don't listen to you. And so they stayed around in Wano waiting for the flower festival to happen, or the fire festival to happen, and that's where they're at right now. So yeah, I imagine that they are definitely going to report back to the government on whoever wins the war, but yeah, I guess their one main concern right now is who's who. So with that being said, we now cut back over to the fourth floor. We cut back to the Cat Cafe, where we see the continuing fight between Jinbei and Huzu. Huzu is still in his hybrid saber-tooth cat form, and he's using Geppo, so he's really showcasing all of the Rokushiki techniques in this chapter, except for Kamiye. He doesn't use Kamiye. That's like the paper body one, where you can, like, make your body like paper and you can, like, move out of the way of attacks. He doesn't display that, but he shows Geppo, Soru, Shigan. We saw Tekai last chapter, and the Rankyaku, which is the Tempest kick. He doesn't pull off a Roku Ogun, but, you know, he could. He has the tail. The same thing with Lucci when Lucci went into his leper form, so, you know, that might be his final attack, but I guess we'll see what happens when Jinbei gets a hold of him here, okay? So he's jumping around, and Jinbei brings up the question of just like, alright, so wait a second, you mean to tell me you lost the Gomu Gomu no Mi and Luffy ate it, you know, so therefore you hate Luffy? And so Huzu elaborates on this a bit. He's like, well, you know how it goes, Jinbei. You know, I had the fruit, and then red hair Shanks stole the fruit from me, so really I hate Shanks, because he's the one that kind of ruined my life, and, you know, the government threw me in prison after that. But, you know, Luffy, he's got the fruit, and he has Shanks' hat, so I can't help but to hate him, you know? We're gonna find out some stuff about Huzu in this chapter where, yeah, he's not a good person. No, he certainly isn't. But that did confirm that Shanks was the one that stole the fruit from him. I know some people were saying, is like, well, you know, just because Shanks had the fruit at the beginning of the story and Luffy ate it, and Shanks' crew, like Lucky Roo, said it came from an enemy, doesn't necessarily mean they're the ones that stole it from Huzu's, you know, convoy vessel or anything like that. You know, it could have been a situation where another pirate or one of the Yonko or something stole it, and then Shanks stole it from them and then ended up in the East Blue somehow. But no, it was confirmed right here. No, it was Shanks. Shanks attacked Huzu's CP9 vessel and stole the fruit, and that's the thing that kind of ruined his life. But just by extension, by the fact Shanks used to wear the straw hat, now Luffy wears the straw hat, and he has the power of the Gomu Gomu no Mi, he just hates Luffy by extension. Because every time, and it was even mentioned last chapter when, or no, this was like when they first met, when Jinbe and Huzu first met, Jinbei announced himself as the helmsman of the Straw Hats. Just hearing the name Straw Hat Pirates or Straw Hat Luffy triggered those memories in Huzu, like, oh man, I'm gonna freaking kill you guys, you know? So, yeah, that's how that goes. He fires off another Fang pistol, which is like that super devastating attack where he like bites down and sends out like a ghostly image of his teeth, his saber-toothed cat teeth, and anything it hits just gets like incinerated, you know, just like annihilated out of existence, right? So he fires one of those at Jinbei. Jinbei armament hockeys up his arm, and it seems like he knocks it away, and it works. It like knocks the attack away from him, but he looks down at his armament hockey coated arm, and it is still bleeding. So that kind of reminds me of the scene when Luffy was fighting against Hordy at Fishman Island, and even though he had armament hockey, Hordy's like shark teeth were still enough to puncture through. And so Huzu says, you know, oh, your armament hockey's not going to be good enough, okay? So this is a thing, like, you know, a long time we thought like Rokushiki was kind of not as strong as hockey, or ever since the introduction of hockey, Rokushiki is not as impressive anymore. But no, and we even see in this chapter Huzu combining armament hockey with the Rokushiki, something we are definitely going to see from like Rob Lucci or Kaku in the future when we ever get to see those guys fight again. So this is kind of like a prelude to that. But yeah, this Fang pistol is no joke. Anything this hits completely gets annihilated, and he's just firing them off like machine gun rapid fire, okay? He's just firing all these Fang pistols, and you know, he's in the air right now. He used Geppo to get some airtime, and now he's just like, and just firing them off on the ground. Jinbei is dodging them very well, in fact, and the Fang pistols are just firing through the floor, and we see a panel where they're on the fourth floor, so one floor below that on the third floor, these freaking Fang pistols of annihilation keep firing off from the ceiling, and it's like, no! Why? You know, all the beast pirates underneath are getting like annihilated, getting their limbs freaking, you know, chopped off by these things. It's like, who's who? Why would you do this, right? And so after this massive volley of attacks, Jinbei dodges all of them pretty well. Huzu just kind of sneers at Jinbei and just like, is like, oh, Jinbei, you dodged all those attacks well. You know, you can move pretty good on land, you know, more than I expected, you being a fishman and all. And Jinbei is just like, kind of like stunned about that, and he's just like, oh, you've got to be kidding me with this shit. Really? You're gonna dig that shit up now? Like, oh my god. Like, at this point, I'm like, alright, Jinbei, he was already gonna kick his ass, but like, now it's like next level. Now he's making it really, really personal, bringing like the discrimination into it and everything. And you know, I made a video a couple weeks ago on the past of One Piece, like all the different like centuries of One Piece, and about 200 years ago, this was mentioned before by Jinbei. I think it was during the Impel Down arc, when he was talking to Ace. It might have been during Fishman Island itself. But Jinbei mentioned a time period where the world government did not even consider fishmen and merfolk to be like they considered them fish and nothing else. Like, they weren't intelligent, or they didn't have like sentience of their own. They treated them just like animals. And that was like a very, very dark time period for fishmen and merfolk and all of Fishman Island together, right? And so it was 200 years ago, and we don't know the whole whole story of this, and maybe Oda will go more into detail with it now, because this is a very interesting part of the One Piece history, where somebody, we don't know, because this was before Neptune's time, Otohime, Fisher Tiger, 200 years ago, that is when Fishman Island was accepted into the world government, and, you know, fishmen and merfolk were actually given rights in the One Piece world. Now, of course, slavery is still abound all over the place, and fishmen and merfolk are still slaves. We saw that during Mjolnir's backstory when he went to Fishman Island, and that was only like 10 plus years ago or whatever. And then you have Who's Who spouting this bullshit, right? And so it's a very out of date sort of concept where Who's Who, like, is like, the way he said it is basically like, oh, he's kind of viewing Jinbei as nothing more like a fish, because he's like, oh, you can move well on land, being a fish man, and Jinbei is like, oh, I'm gonna and he keeps going with it too by the end of the chapter. We'll get to that. And so Jinbei, he preps armament hockey for another attack. Who's Who charges armament into his saber-toothed cat fangs, charges at Jinbei, attack called Flash Fang, and he kind of like tries to bite Jinbei's arm off. He like charges at Jinbei, Jinbei blocks it with his armament hockey arm, and then he grabs both of Who's Who's fangs, and like, I wanted it to have a scene where he just like rips them right out of Who's Who's skull. So he grabs Who's Who by the fangs, which are pretty good arm holds right there, and then just flips him over and crashes him into the ground, okay? And for good measure, he also uses the water bullet technique, like the technique, I think Arlong used one of them, Horty used a bunch of them, where he takes like the water droplets on his hand and he like flings them like bullets at the enemy. So he literally like, you know, blocks Who's Who's attack, grabs him by his teeth, slams him into the ground like an over-the-shoulder like body throw or whatever, and then he takes out the freaking water and just like riddles him through of the water bullets, okay? So Jinbei's having none of this shit. And so he does that. Who's Who manages to dodge it by using Shave. He uses Soru to dodge the attack there, and he lands, and he's just like, hey, there is something I wanted to ask you. And Jinbei's like, just stop talking, dude. Stop talking. This is a fight. And so this is where Who's Who explains a little bit of his backstory here to Jinbei and the question that he wanted to ask him, okay? So he's like, look, when I was in prison, I was tortured like every single day for years. It was like a literal hell. Now, they still do not mention Impel Down as the prison. I feel like, considering he was a government agent, and from what the CP0 said, it was implied like the CP0 were the ones that brought him in and like tortured him and interrogated him like every day. So I'm feeling this was probably like a special prison, like a dungeon underneath Pangaea Castle or something, like directly under the thumb of the world government. I think that's where he was kept. And he mentions how the situation was so hopeless and there was no way to really escape. So, you know, I think it was even worse than Impel Down in this situation. So he says that there was a prison guard that told him this story while he was locked up. And this was the story of the sun god Nika. Okay, Nika. And so this sun god was apparently a deity that was worshipped by slaves hundreds of years ago to bring them freedom, to bring them salvation. Now, it's left ambiguous whether or not this is an actual sun god that it like exists in the world that was like worshipped by other cultures, or it was a deity that was brought into existence by the hopelessness that the slaves felt. Like, they had to hold on to something to attempt to be freed, and so they created this sun god as that sign of hope. It's one or the other. But at any rate, the guard told Who's Who, like, why don't you worship this sun god? You know, because slaves would always worship this sun god since ancient times, and maybe that'll bring you, you know, the hope that you need. And so Who's Who mentions that it was such a shitty situation for him to be in, he eventually decided to start praying to this sun god, Nika. And so he's telling this story to Jinbei, but he also explains he doesn't really know much more about this deity. And the guard that told him the story disappeared a few days later. So he's in prison, probably in the dungeons of Pangaea Castle, tortured daily. This guard tells him about this sun god, and then he's gone a few days later. And so Who's Who's like, oh crap, I might be next. You know, they might eliminate me next. And that might be a story that he wasn't supposed to talk about. That's why I think this was supposed to be in like Marijois. Because I can imagine, like, you know, maybe there was a prison guard working at Pangaea Castle that might have overheard this story from one of the celestial dragons, or hell, maybe even one of the Gorosei, and so maybe the guard felt a little bit sorry for Who's Who and told him this story to kind of keep his hopes up, and then the higher-ups, like the celestial celestial dragons, the Tenryubito, found out about what the guard said. And he's like, you were not supposed to even know about that story. That is not a story that's probably one of the things that they want to keep locked away in the annals of history that nobody's supposed to know about. So they probably killed the guard. He's probably dead. And so Huzu thought he was going to be next. And so he attempted like a very daring escape. He didn't think he was going to be able to get away, but he did. And we don't know anything more about that, like how he escaped exactly or how he joined up with Kaido's crew or anything of that. But he's just like, you know what, ever since that day, I've held on to that belief in that sun god. And so I just wanted to get out of there, okay? And he's fighting Jinbei here, and they're exchanging blows the entire time this is going on. You know, Huzu's punching him, throwing the fang pistols at him, Jinbei's armament hockey all over the place, and just like, you know, deflecting the attacks. They're taking them head on, and Jinbei's just like, okay, well, what the hell do I have to do with any of this? You know, you're telling me your life story or whatever. And Huzu is like, oh, well, you were the captain of the Sun Pirates. You were on the Sun Pirates, and the Sun Pirates were all former slaves, right? And I mean, actually, the history of fishmen and merfolk is pretty much just a history of slavery, so I imagine you would probably know something about this sun god. Jinbei, can you just, like, punch this guy in the face really hard at this point? He does. Don't worry. We get to that. So Jinbei is extremely upset over this, and he's like, okay, screw this. I'm not talking to this guy anymore. I'm just finishing this, okay? And so Huzu, he releases a volley of the Shigan technique, the finger pistol. Remember, similar to Rob Lucci, when Rob Lucci was in his leopard form, his hybrid, he had like the talons, like the claws, like the cat claws on his fingers. And so that gets the Shigan even more powerful, and he's using the rapid fire spots technique. So he's he's armament hockey up too. So Huzu's armament hockey up his fingers with the claws and like machine gun Shigan onto Jinbei. Jinbei, you know, he uses armament seemingly on like his whole body, which he would be like the first character to actually do that in an effective way. You know, because remember when Virgo went into his full armament and Law just wrecked him, or the time Pico went into full armament and Zoro just wrecked him. So this is the first time that Jinbei actually, you know, he's using the full body armament, it seems, and it's strong enough to protect him, and it actually breaks one of Huzu's fingers. So he's like releasing these like machine gun Shigan, and it breaks one of his fingers. And Huzu had armament too. So that kind of is like when Luffy was fighting Katakuri and they both had armament and he punched Katakuri and Luffy's hand was like all swollen and it was like it hurt. Basically the same thing there too, where Jinbei's expertise with armament is way better than Huzu's. And so he broke one of his fingers, and oh man, this is such a badass scene. It's really cool. So freaking Jinbei grabs both of Huzu's arms, okay, and uses like shark grip. It's the name of a technique called shark grip. So armament hockey grabs Huzu's arms, grips him so tightly, he like lets out a mighty cat yell, like, ah, damn it! And then he can't move. He tries a Rankyaku right in Jinbei's face. Doesn't even phase him. And then he's like, all right, well, prepare to get your face bit off. And then he uses the fang pistol, that same technique that can like obliterate, you know, walls and pillars, and even Jinbei's armament wasn't able to stand up to it completely. He uses that point blank right in Jinbei's face, hits him right there, bam! And when the dust settles, I mean, he's bleeding, it hurts, but his head's still there. It didn't make a dent. He didn't even bite off any part of Jinbei's body or anything. It's still there. And, you know, Huzu's like, oh, crap. Oh, sorry. It's too late for that. And so Jinbei is like, you know, if you're just going to make broad statements about fishmen and our history and the slavery, you know, don't be surprised when this shit happens. And then, boom! Freaking, what's the name of this technique again? I got ahead of myself there. Yeah, okay, I was looking because normally Jinbei prefaces his attacks with like, you know, 5,000 brick fist or 10,000 brick fist or something like that. No, in this instance, he just says, you know, Fisherman Karate, ultimate technique, and I think that's the same category as the Vagabond Drill, the same technique he used against Watatsume to finish him off. It was also the technique he used against Big Mom to knock her off the Sunny. So, like, these are Jinbei's, like, strongest moves in his repertoire, okay? Like, probably the apex of Fisherman Karate, period. Vagabond Drill is one, and this technique, the Gargoyle Stone Tile Fist, is another one, right? And so he only uses these techniques against really strong opponents or opponents that have pissed him off quite a bit, which Huzu definitely meets that criteria at this point in the battle. I don't know if the punch actually hits Huzu, or because Jinbei's techniques rely on the shockwaves of how Fisherman Karate functions. So it's possible he could have just like charged up all of his power, like the one punch, and just like the armament hockey, Fisherman Karate, everything, and just whoosh, and like the fist stops like right here, and then like Huzu's head explodes, like boom, and then he just gets knocked back and slams into the ground. And then Jinbei, he just like stares right at Huzu and just like, you know, like shoots like a glare at him, just like, and then that's the end of the battle. That's the end of the chapter. I'm assuming that's the end of the battle. I think Huzu's helmet got destroyed when he did that. We didn't see it fall off or anything, but I mean, you know, unless this is like Tobi from Naruto, like Obito, where the mask is like indestructible, I'm pretty sure Huzu's mask is going to be like, you know, falling off, just completely destroyed after this technique. I would say that's a pretty good way to end this battle. Like, we got a lot of other fights going on right now with the other Tobi Roppo, so I'm not really sure how many chapters Oda wants to give each individual, like, Straw Hat. But this fight with Jinbei and Huzu, if it ended right here, I mean, with Jinbei just like enraged at Huzu and like the drivel that he's spouting about the history of fishmen and the slavery and everything. And at the end of the day, Huzu doesn't give a crap about any of that. It's just all like, hey, you know, I heard this story about this sun god and, you know, slaves worshipped him, and, hey, Jinbei, you know a bunch of slaves, tell me about it. Jinbei's like, you don't even care about, like, all of the horrible atrocities that have happened to my people for, you know, literally hundreds of years. I'm just going to wreck your shit today, right? And then he does, and then that's it, right? So, yeah, that's it. Good for Jinbei, right? You know, maybe next chapter, as Huzu's on the ground, you know, maybe Jinbei will allude to something involving, like, you know, the moment in history when the world government accepted the fishmen and the merfolk into their fold. It was 200 years ago when the first Ryugu Kingdom delegation was able to attend Reverie. And then something happened, and then 2 centuries later was the next time they attended Reverie. They did not attend Reverie the second time until the actual current story with, you know, Neptune and Shirahoshi when they went, right? And so then you also have the struggles of Otohime and Fisher Tiger. And remember, Jinbei's ultimate dream, because all of the Straw Hats, of course, have their dreams. Jinbei, I don't think has actually explained his dream, like, in front of all of the Straw Hats yet, but they all know what it is. He explained it at Fishman Island. I'm saying, like, when he actually joined. His dream is very much the dream of Otohime, for all of the fishmen and merfolk on Fishman Island to live under the sun. That was the significance of the title of the Sun Pirates, okay? And that's why they had the brand. They branded the former slaves with the hoof of the celestial dragon with the Sun Pirates sigil, all right? Because we want to live in a world where, like, we can just live on the surface equally with all of the humans, okay? That's what Otohime wanted. And so that is something he still struggles for to this very day. And with Jinbei being a member of the Straw Hats, you know, eventually the Straw Hats are going to have to go up against the world government. I don't exactly know how that's going to work, you know, story-wise and everything, but eventually that battle's going to happen, and it's going to boil down to Jinbei fighting against the mortal enemies of the fishmen and the merfolk, and that's the celestial dragons. And this is the same thing Dragon wants too. Dragon doesn't want to abolish the entirety of the world government. He just wants to get rid of the Tenryubito, because that's where, you know, all the slaves, you know, it's because of their laws and their edicts. That's why slavery is a thing. The structure of the world government could work without the celestial dragons being the ones objectively in charge. So that's what Dragon wants to do. And, you know, at the end of the story, there was a theory that, like, if the Red Line gets destroyed, all of the fishmen and merfolk get on the Noah, they get to the surface, and it's like on the ruins of Marijois, where the Red Line, you know, once stood at that one point, when all the oceans are connected. That'll be like the new Fishman Island. That'll be a new Fishman Island with the Noah there in the background, with the sun shining down on all of them, living on the surface, finally realizing their century-long dream, okay? So, this is like one step towards that. Jinbei is now a member of the Straw Hats and all that stuff. This was a very brutal fight. We got a lot of exposition in this chapter involving the sun god, Nika. So, I'm not really sure how that's going to go. I could do a video about that, talking about, like, what that involves and that entails and everything. Probably have to go back in the story a bit to see if the sun god was mentioned at any other point in the story, which, knowing Oda, it was probably referenced in, like, chapter 200, you know, way back during, like, Alabasta past as some character probably randomly mentioned it or something. But I'll have to go back and do some research on that. But anyway, yeah, thanks for watching the video, everybody. This will be Tekking, Barry, and Jinbei signing out. Later, everyone.